hash-based, PHP-based, and Haxe, then completion. You're probably wondering what the hell I'm even talking about. Hello and welcome to Luke Someone Books and Studios. We are in the middle of a video series creating and building a website from scratch. We are going to be moving into the actual Haxe-based backend, which we originally were going to use Hackshare. Of course, I'm now considering actually starting to do something a little more different, which is to give you an opportunity to understand the hash-based and the PHP-based side of using Haxe directly without using any libraries initially, and then we'll actually start using Hackshare a little later once I've put it into a position that allows us to do a PHP-based router, because at the moment it's more Ajax and hash-based. So without further ado, let's get started. So if you haven't used Haxe before, this is where you need to go, haxe.org, and on this page you'll be able to see exactly what Haxe is. And obviously at the top we're saying it's a cross-platform toolkit. It's an open source toolkit based on a modern, high-level, strictly typed programming language, a cross-compiler, a complete cross-platform standard library, and ways to access each platform's native capabilities. And you're probably wondering at this point, if you're new to Haxe or you are perhaps interested in new technology, Haxe is definitely one of those languages that has the capacity to put a hole into the web development community of the world, because at the moment web development is one of those things that is not exactly easy to come by. It's one of those areas of programming that requires the use of multiple languages, not just one. In fact, obviously with the advent of Node.js, you can just use JavaScript and that's completely fine, but traditionally before Node.js you often had to learn more than just one language. That was perhaps JavaScript and PHP. New languages have come forth, C# with ASP.NET, Java with its backend, most often it's Spring or Spring Boot. And you have other languages as well, of course, like Python and Perl, that are also web development languages, ideally for web development. Of course, those languages have other uses as well, but those are the ideal targets within the web development community. Now, if we were to scroll down a bit, you'll actually find that Haxe generates JavaScript code, and because it generates JavaScript, it also supports Node.js. It also supports Python, it supports Java, it supports PHP, it supports C#. The only language on this list that it does not support is Perl, and perhaps there's perhaps if we were to include Perl on this list, then Haxe could potentially be the most popular web development language of choice in the future. I would reckon perhaps that Haxe, with the power that it offers, is a interesting toolkit, to say the least, to build websites with. Now, if you are to pick up Haxe and you are in fact listening to this video and wondering, well, what happens if I want to start actually building with Haxe and start actually creating websites with Haxe? Well, what you probably want to do is, first of all, you want to go to download. Now, there's two different versions. There's Haxe 3.4.7 and there's also 4.0. Now, if we were to go to 4.0, what you want to do is go to the latest version of 4.0, which is release candidate 3. Now, this is the version that I'll be using in my tutorial series. I'm going to be using Haxe 3.4.7 code, however, so that if you actually want to use Haxe and you decide to use 3.4.7 rather than 4.0, that's entirely up to you. That's perfectly fine. I will of course be using this as a reference source. If you're not familiar with Haxe, there are tutorials on Haxe in various ways. If you are already familiar with programming, then this should be fairly easy to pick up. If you're not familiar with programming, I would suggest looking at tutorials for obviously getting started with programming. I may do that at some point in the future. I'm not sure. I'm not going to make any promises. This is primarily going to be a video for people who are already familiar with either Haxe or programming in general. Just a note, I am going to be using jQuery in this tutorial. So if you do pick up Haxe in Haxe 3.4.7, if we were to go to the API documentation, we're using Haxe 3.4.7. What I will be using is JS jQuery. So this is a jQuery toolkit. This is actually based on an external library that is part of the standard library of Haxe in version 3.4.7. If we were to go to development, however, which is the version that I will be using, and then we go to JS again, well, jQuery is missing. So if you are to use Haxe version 4.0, what you need to do is go to GitHub and you want to search for jQuery externs by a person called Andy Lee. jQuery extern for Haxe. So it's this here. The reason why is because they have removed this from the standard library in Haxe 4.0. So you will need to download this, and there's a way to do it. So once you've installed Haxe, if you're just getting started with it, then what you'll need to do is open up your command prompt or whatever it might be. I've already installed this, so I don't need to do this again. But what you'll need to do is type in haxlib git jQuery, let's say, just to be simple. I think I put down a jQuery extern or something like that. And what you would then need to do is go here, claim with HTTPS, copy this, and then paste it in here. And what that will do is it will install via Git the jQuery extern. Of course, you'll also need Git installed on your computer as well for that to work. So that is that. Now, if you're not familiar and you haven't looked at my previous video series, I mean, this is technically part of the current video series, but if you have not looked, we have been designing a website in the background. In the last couple of videos, we have been looking at building this website, which is primarily my own website. I'm going to be using it as part of this tutorial series to help you understand how to build a website from scratch using Haxe. So if we were to, currently at the moment, if we were to go to the side screen, there's not really much going on here. We've got a footer and a header. We've got a navigation bar that's not really doing anything. When we click on these things, it's not doing anything. Like I said in the introduction video, I'm not going to be using Haxe initially. I'm actually going to write everything from scratch so that you understand how to use Haxe in web development. So if we were to go back to the main screen just for the time being, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to open Visual Studio Code. So if we were to go back here, for example, you go through the installation process, follow the on-screen instructions for your target platform. It really doesn't matter. And I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code. This is a project that I'm currently working on, so I'm going to ignore that for the time being and go somewhere else. So I'm going to create a new window, and what I'm going to do is go to my project, which should be in here, business, IT, internal, websites, business websites, Personal Studios, dev, Haxe. So we're inside this folder, And what I'm going to do is open folder. I'm going to copy and paste it into there, and I'm going to select it. Now, a typical Haxe setup often requires what's called a build.hxml file. And what this does is it is your compilation or compiler source file, let's say, for lack of a better term for it. And what I'm going to do in here is put in -cp, which means I want to look into a specific folder for all of my source files. If we were to do /, we're using the current folder. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use source because I'm going to put all of my projects source files in a source folder. Secondly, what I'm going to do is type js .. because I want to come out of this folder into the www directory. That's 3 W's, not 4. And then into script main.js. So I want to generate JavaScript code. And then I'm going to take my main. And because I mentioned that I was using the version Haxe 4, what I'm going to do is -lib jQuery extern. Now I'm going to create a simple folder, a simple file in here. I'm just going to call it main.hx, and I just want to make sure that this all works when I compile it. So I'm going to type package. That is required on top of every single Haxe file. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to create a class, and I'm going to call it main. So a class, this is an object-oriented language, so everything revolves around classes. Now, as you can see, it is complaining invalid -main, so it actually understands, because we've got a Haxe extension in here, which is here. So what this Haxe extension is doing is it is picking up the fact that we have a HXML file, and it has started in the background Haxe compilation server. And what that is doing is it's picking up this file, and it is automatically finding problems in our code as we type and save our files. So here we've got an error, and it's saying invalid -main. Main does not have a static function main. So let's resolve that. How do we do that? We type static function main. So if you're not familiar with programming, static is basically another word for shared. We can use this function anywhere in our code base. Technically we wouldn't want to, because this is what's called the main entry point. This is the very first thing that's going to be called when we start our program. Now, depending on our target language, in the case of JavaScript, when we first load our page, this is the very first thing in JavaScript context that is going to be called. Now, a function is basically a block of instructions. It is a block of instructions that basically defines how we would like to operate and create what it is that we want to do. We include our logic, our if statements, our conditionals, our loops, etc. So, to make sure that actually works, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open in terminal. In fact, I don't tend to actually do that. What I do is I go into here and I just go to Windows PowerShell. I tend to like to, oh, don't do that, god damn it, stupid. My internet security being weird, isolating everything. But anyway, so I tend to prefer this because I actually prefer, because it's a bigger screen and I can see all the errors. So what I like to do is let's just test and make sure that all works. So haxe.build.hxml. Let's allow that to make sure that compiles. So that did compile, and what I'm going to now do is I'm going to go into here, I'm going to go to scripts, main.js, and this is what is generated. So as you can see, it has generated a function which is in the context of a global. I mean, I'm not familiar with this use strict thing, so I'm not going to comment on that. But what it's also done is it's created this main, which is a function that is basically JavaScript notation for a class, because JavaScript has no concept of classes. And it's also got this main function, which has generated from our code, and then it's calling that function. I believe, if I remember correctly, everything wrapped inside of these brackets, and then this is considered to be called automatically upon on page load. I think that's what that means. I think that's what that means. I can't remember now, but I believe that's what it does. I just have to have a bit of coffee just to keep me going. Right, so now that we've got this far, what I'd now like to do is actually begin by developing our website. Now, yeah, I just got to be sure that I'm on the right tracks here. So if we go back to our website, this is what it looks like. Obviously, it's not doing anything. So what I'd like to do is, going back to our main screen, is actually begin setting our folders up so that we've got two targets. We've got our JavaScript target and our PHP target. So we're going to be using PHP for these tutorials. And that also means we are also going to need WAMP, at least for me anyway, because I'm using Windows. So I'm going to create two folders here. In fact, technically I'm going to create three. So one of them is going to be the client. So this is the client folder. The next is going to be server. This is the server folder. And finally, I'm going to create what's called a shared folder. So to explain, the client folder is going to contain all of our code that is strictly for JavaScript compilation, or strictly for the JavaScript target. The server folder is going to be all of our code that is strictly for our PHP target. And the shared folder is any data that we want to share between the client and the server. This is my typical setup. It might not necessarily be other people's typical setup, but this is how I like to do things. So what I'd like to now do is create another HXML file. This is going to be the same. We're going to have main, but this time I'm going to do something different. I'm going to say -php. Now, this is another thing I need to mention. Haxe 4.0, if you are to use Haxe 4.0, you absolutely have to use PHP version 7, because PHP version 5 does not work with Haxe 4.0. It does work with Haxe 3.4.7, which is the current version, at least until Haxe 4.0 is actually fully, properly released. So just bear that in mind. So we've got -php, and what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to go out of this folder. I'm going to go into www and includes. Now, you do not want to add a /, and I'll explain why in a minute. Now, I'm also going to include what a library called record macros. Now, I've got my own version of this library, which is designed excuse me, to work with Haxe, and I'll explain that at a later point when we actually start using Haxe. Obviously, these tutorials are primarily for actually getting started in web development with Haxe, so I'm not going to use that right now. But record macros for people who do not know, we're going to go back to GitHub, and I'm going to type in record macros, and not this repository, I meant all of GitHub. And we want to go to this one, Haxe Foundation Record Macros. And what this is, it is, as you can see here, a macro-based library that provides object relational mapping to Haxe. So you can basically, you can create your database tables using, let's say, HeidiSQL. That's the program that I'm going to be using. And we can interact with the database using this library. It's actually the go-to library for getting interactions with or making interactions with a database. Now this supports MySQL, SQLite, and I believe something else. I can't remember now. But yeah, that's what that supports. It doesn't support PostgreSQL. It doesn't support Oracle database. It doesn't support Microsoft SQL. So those database options are unfortunately out the window. And of course, because it's SQL based, it doesn't support MongoDB or anything like that, which are the no SQL alternatives. So just be aware of that. I do not believe there is any version limitations with regards to this, although I do use MySQL version 5. I don't know about later versions. Obviously there are later versions of MySQL, but I'll be using Haxe MySQL version 5 for the purposes of these tutorials. So this is what we're going to be using, and I'll teach you all of that in good time. So again, what you would do is you would use haxlib git. There is another way you can install libraries using haxlib. That's just haxlib install. And if you were to go to something like lib.haxe.org, for example, which is the library repository for all of the libraries that other people have made and contributed to the repository, this repository manager here, and you can take a look at all of these different libraries, and you can take a look and install different things. There's lots and lots of different things. There's OpenFL, which is basically like it's kind of like a Flash clone, I suppose, but it's also been developed for a variety of different purposes as well, not just necessarily for video games. It's one of the most popular libraries, as you can see. And there's other libraries as well. And it's quite good, but it's not where everything happens to lie. In fact, most people tend to use GitHub, I believe. But if you wanted to take a look at that option is of course there. So that's what you want to do. You want to get record macros, and inside of here, I'm going to, I believe that's everything. So let me show you and demonstrate what I mean by this /. So what I'm going to do is go back to here, and I'm going to say Haxe build server.hxml. So this error comes up, Unix error make dir. It can't make that directory. But if I were to remove this /, suddenly it works. I don't know why that happens, but just be aware of that. Do not put a / at the end of the paths, because otherwise it will complain, as it just did. So just be aware of that. Now what I'm also going to do is put this into the client. I'm then going to create another package I'm going to put client here just to be sure. Next, I'm going to create a file in here, server. And I'm going to have another main.hx. This is going to be server, as you can see. And in fact, actually, thinking about it, that's not going to work. That's not going to work now. It'll complete because it'll be ambiguous which version of main that you actually want to use. So what I'm going to do is create our main entry point for the server as well. And if I were to compile either one of those, so type not found main, of course. So what I need to now modify is source/client, right? And then, or alternatively, what I could do. So there's two ways in which we could do this. So there's this is one way. So I can say source/server like this, and I can compile, and that'll be fine, right? If I were to haxe build.hxml, that's fine. There's another way we can do it, which is if I were to add the package names like this, client and server like that, and instead of doing this, I can get rid of that and this, and instead say main client.main. So it will use this as the package name, which is what we defined here, and the same here, server.main, and it will do the same thing. It's perfectly fine with that. And in fact, I'm going to keep it like this because what I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to access this shared folder, and I don't want any problems later on with regards to that. Now I'm going to leave it for this video for the time being because it's getting on, and I'd like to construe this as, let's say, a getting started tutorial for Haxe web development. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. In the next video, I'm going to actually start developing this website properly. So hopefully everything is good. Yeah, whatever. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully I'll see you next time. Goodbye.